Yes, my talk is Scroll Up, Adventures in Accessible Storytelling. It leads really nicely on from what Jim was just saying, and also maybe should be called inclusive storytelling, but this one has a little bit more alliteration. My name's Becky. I'm a software engineer in visual journalism at BBC News. What is visual journalism? I hear you cry. We are a team of journalists, designers, and developers who work together to create interesting, interactive, and engaging ways of telling news stories using complicated data, and exciting things that happen in the news. We have little mini versions of our team based all over the world, from Jakarta to Nairobi, from Delhi to Lagos, and Russia now too. And they do exactly the same thing, but just focusing on their local regions. Projects I've worked on since I've been here include the NHS tracker, where we look at how your local NHS trusts are hitting their government targets. Freedom Trash Can, where you can drag items of female oppression into a flying trash can and find out why women today want to get rid of them. The Food Climate Calculator, where you can put in your dietary choices and see the impact they have on the environment in real-world terms, such as like miles you drive in a car or flights you take. And my personal favourite, What Has Trump Said About Your Country?, where you can see Trump's relationship with your country in forms of emojis and tweets and stats. But today I want to talk to you a little bit more about some of the stuff we've done recently. We've been experimenting with some new formats over the last year and just how we've developed those to make them as inclusive as possible. The most recent one we've done is election results. Trigger warning for some of you, this doesn't contain election results, so it might be distressing. So we've been developing Scrolly Telling, which is when you, I've lost my mouse, when you scroll through a story and visualizations update as you read through the text. This is the one we did for the election, where it starts off with a nice little dot chart, giving you the results. It then, as you read through, animates to form a little map. Something's gone a little bit wrong here. You can't actually see the map. There we go. And then zooms into different constituencies and shows you the results of each one. Yeah, so that's basically what Scrolly Telling does. I came back from holiday, beginning of December, was told that this is what they wanted to build. I was like, it's the 3rd of December, the election's on the 12th, and they're like, yep, good luck. So that's what happened. As you can see, we did actually manage to get it out, did manage to build it, but there was a lot of work that went into that beforehand. We developed our first Scrolly Telling article back in April, and this is like a culmination of the iterations we've done since then. So, if this works, I want to show you the first one we did, which is based on the gender pay gap data we had. So this is, our very first Scrolly Telling article, where you've got 10,000 dots that represent each company in our data set, or 10,500. As you scroll through, it splits them into the ones that pay men more in purple, women more in orange, and equal in grey. We get rid of the grey and have a look at actually what this means in a little fancy chart, and then go through and like highlight different industries and companies in particular, and look at how like the biggest and smallest pay gaps. So the first big challenge with this was how on earth do you draw 10,000 data points? It's not, if anyone who knows about like rendering stuff, it's not easy. I spent some time creating a prototype with a few different techniques. Usually when we do a data visualization, we go straight for D3 and SVG. Google said, no, don't do that. So I tried D3 and Canvas, and the fans would start whirring, everything would crash, and definitely wasn't something we could put out. So I discovered something called Reddual, which is based on WebGL, and basically this takes the effort to render dots, or anything you want to render, from the CPU of your computer to the GPU, making it much more performant. It actually meant that we could do it, but it looked like this, and I'm used to writing JavaScript, and this was terrifying. Like, that is just nonsensical to me. But my designer encouraged me that it would be fine, and so I found a blog that was using the same thing to do similar stuff, so I stole his code, proved that I could use it, reverse engineered it, and started to understand it, and that meant we could continue. So my designer gave me that, which you've probably guessed from the thing I showed, but when they gave me this, they were like, oh yeah, you have 2 weeks to build this. And I was like, well, we've only just proved that we can do any of this. This is, and with first Scrolly Telling, what are we doing? But they're like, yeah, no, it's fine, go ahead. No. So we tried to create a circle of dots. That turned out to be very difficult. We did this weird shape, which, as you saw, animates in and out. That was just very trippy for about 3 days. I think it drove me slightly mad. But eventually we solved it. We got it to this, which was supposed to look like, but it would involve some hardcore flashbacks to school and maths. And then transferring it to a histogram was actually surprisingly easy using the D3 JS library. And then we put the axes and labels on with an SVG over the top because I did not want to try and do that in Canvas at all. So right, done, sure. Well, not quite. Being the BBC, we have to make sure we cater to everybody. So that includes Internet Explorer users, unfortunately. As of January last year, about 1% of our users still use IE11, so we had to cater to them. And it meant that the library I'd used for doing the Scrolly Telling didn't work. So I had to dig back through their documentations and find a version that did, which did work eventually but caused other problems. But it was good enough. It did the trick. We only had 2 weeks. Then we had to consider what would happen if someone didn't have JavaScript. This might sound mad, but a person might still be downloading JavaScript. They might be on a train and the JavaScript doesn't download. God forbid, they might have actually turned it off. This doesn't mean they don't deserve to see our content, though. So we spend a lot of time creating what we call core content. For this article, I just took screenshots of the visualizations, so it would make sense to users, so they could actually still have a chance of seeing what we were talking about, and then gave it good alt text too. And then we come to accessibility. Remember, accessibility is very important because real humans rely on you to write good code to make sure they can actually use it. So one of the things I concentrated on first was keyboard accessibility. So making sure that you could tab through the article and use directional buttons to create a good no-mouse experience. Thank you. Well, a lot of articles I saw in my research, just if you tried to use the keyboard, you got stuck somewhere and then you couldn't get out of it, and it was just confusing. And then we came to screen reader experiences. This was quite hard for our first storytelling article because we had to find the balance between text in the visualization, which helped to understand what we were showing with all the dots, but also made sense if you couldn't see it. So that was a really difficult balance to try and strike, and I had to work very hard with the journalists to impress upon them how important it was. During the investigation stage, I also spent a lot of time reading about animations and how animations have physical impacts on people. So we didn't want our cool new Scrolly Telling thing to make people feel sick and dizzy. So what I did was implement an animation toggle, which meant that if someone clicked on it, instead of all the dots moving around and transitioning, it would just change from stage to stage and hopefully have less of the ill impacts that we had. Which went down really well. The author of the article enjoyed it. So that was a win in my book. So after that, we decided we wanted to play with it more because it was exciting. And we decided it was a great hit, even though we had no evidence to back that up. So we created How Much Warmer Is Your City using global data about how temperatures have changed over the last 100 years in lots of different cities. We have an awesome 3D spinning globe, which you can interact with and look at all the data. Ooh, and spins around if you leave it alone long enough. There we go. And then we have this nice little interactive bit where you can look for your city. Oh, we'll go with Belfast. No, we'll go to Brighton. And then last time I demoed this, it broke. Yes, it's fine. Okay, so we've got another storytelling section where you scroll through the data that was horribly complicated and mathematical. It took us ages to figure out how we could actually show it to a user without scaring them. And we sort of handhold them through the different scenarios of like how hot it might be by 2100 in their city. Just like that. So for that, and then we also have some cool little animated SVGs. I changed my slides this morning, so I've actually got no idea what I'm about to say. Ah, here we go. So for the storytelling part, I took that storytelling library that I mentioned for our other article and adapted it to make it more class-based, more using ES6, and also more tightly coupled to our own internal code. This meant that I could also build in a nice fallback for the older browsers. So instead of us having to change the code entirely for this not as good experience that we had before, we could sort of progressively enhance what code we were using. And the chart was just built with D3. We have this cool animated SVG that I was very pleased with. Did it all in CSS. but the animations did mean that we had to consider animation toggles again. So we brought it back, but this time it was bigger and better. We hooked into the prefers reduced motion query, which you can set on your device if you don't want to see animation. And that meant that if you enabled that, it would automatically set to off. So users who have chosen not to see that wouldn't even have to. They wouldn't even have to touch the toggle. It would automatically be like that for them. And yeah, people seem to like that. The only thing about that is that if you put an iPhone onto like low power mode or something, it basically enables that. So my designer was looking at it going, why is it broken? Why is it broken? And took us a day or so to realize it was because that had automatically toggled it. Unlike the gender pay gap one, this one was translated into over 25 different languages, which meant we had to consider how it looked if you translated it to right to left languages. This is just how much one was a city in 25 different languages. But also with that comes considering all the different people that are going to use it. So people all over the world will be using different devices, have different connections, have different amount of data available. So we have to be really mindful of performance. And it's not a small project. We did it in a variety of ways. Images were optimized. We made sure we're only pulling in code from libraries that we're actually using. The data for each city, we only pulled in once they'd selected their city, so you didn't get data from all over the world. We also lazy loaded our images too. We also, for Node JavaScript, all the interactive elements had their own different fallbacks. The only thing you couldn't actually get anymore was the bit where you have to choose a city in the scrolly section, so that just had a please update your browser message. And we also made sure the lazy loading images still worked without JavaScript, so that instead of them being lazy loaded, you would see them using no script tags. So it was seen by over 1.2 million people, which, so went very well. It was tweeted by the likes of Greenpeace and the Prime Minister of Singapore, strangely. And a lot more effort went into it than I've mentioned. Like, we spent ages discussing the tone of it, why we wanted it in dark mode. We did a really cool social media campaign around it. And it was really good fun. We had a great team working on it. And I didn't have to fight for why you have to think about accessibility this time. People are starting to get it. So back to the election scrolly. I took all my learnings from this previous stuff and say we only had a week to do it. But the animation toggle is now, like, by default, we put it in. So we just had to consider, that's that side. We had to consider how that would work with the zooming around the map. So we tried to just, like, not animate between those stages, but then that was worse because you were just flying around and it made me feel sick. So we just kept it zoomed out and trying to highlight the different regions. And then we had to make sure that it worked on older browsers, but also AMP and Apple News. So we couldn't get our interactive map to work in those. So we provided this experience without the scrolly. So the dots chart I remade using just CSS and HTML. And then all the text was self-explanatory, so it didn't actually need the map. It was just a nice visual enhancement. And the bar charts that were in some of the results were actually just coded up in CSS and HTML anyway, so they just worked. So this was our no JavaScript, but also Internet Explorer version of the page. That's it.
I refreshed the page straight away this time, so I got questions. Yeah, okay, so we have a comment. I'm so glad to hear someone else steals code, repurposes code.
Oh yeah, no, we didn't like to just steal it, but that's how you learn, isn't it? Take existing things, see how they're done, have a play with them. I tend to rewrite it so I can actually prove to myself that I know what it's doing, but everyone steals code. Everyone Googles everything too. I still have to Google image tags. I can't remember if they close at the end.
I'm a self-confessed thief. Cool. Love the BBC storytelling. Can you share your background and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. Eventually I studied digital media development at university. Part of that, they did a placement year, so I did 13 months in actually this exact team, BBC Visual Journalism, worked full-time, went back to university, worked 1 day a week with the team whilst I was doing my final year. A job happened to come up in the team when I graduated, which was great timing for me, and interviewed and got it as well. So I've been back in the team since then. So I've been there for about 3.5 years in total, but just doing the same thing. And yeah, it's great.
Cool. Can I sneak in a few more questions?
Yeah, one last question.
Okay, one last question. Let's hope it's a good one. All questions are good questions. Sorry, guys. It's not ordered them. I'm trying to find the one with the most votes. Okay. How did you test the user experience of this type of storytelling? Do users prefer reading stories in this manner?
This is something we're still working on. We've used a bit of user Zoom for user testing. We've done a little bit of grabbing people on the street testing, but we haven't managed to do it officially. And we've also lost all our page stats at the moment, so we even don't know how many people are reading it or how far they're getting. So we're just blindly hoping because we like it.
Cool. Sweet. And that's all we have time for in terms of questions, and that was our last talk.